A very warm welcome to this very special edition of Autocar Professional webinar, the theme of which is Rising to a Challenge, Business in the Midst of a Pandemic. At the outset, my personal apologies to those who had logged into this webinar on 8th April. Due to a technical snag at our end, we had to reschedule the webinar to today. So now we are all set to start. And once again, a very warm welcome on behalf of Autocar Professional. Our sincere thanks to all panelists and attendees who are logged in at this point. And depending on which geography you are logging in from, in case you are from another time zone, very good morning, a very good afternoon to those who are in the same time zone as India, and good evening to those who may be ahead of us in time. So at the outset, I would like to congratulate all the Indian automotive industry professionals for successfully scaling the unprecedented challenge of meeting the BS6 norms in a record time. It is a world record of sorts. So hearty congratulations to all of you. As the industry scaled that such a huge challenge, emerged victorious, comes a challenge of a totally different scale, an absolutely unexpected and unprecedented challenge, not only for the Indian industry, but for the global automotive industry also. And not only the auto sector, but across all sectors. Now, when we look at the Indian automotive sector, the challenge is especially even more so because it has come at a time when the industry is already reeling under a kind of almost an unprecedented slowdown, a prolonged slowdown, due to which all industry players were struggling to kind of keep the growth curve going. And now comes this, and now we are in the midst of a not only a pandemic, but also in the midst of a lockdown where operations have come to a naught. So now it's my pleasure to introduce the panelists of the webinar, the special edition of the webinar today. That's me. I'm Sumantra Barua. I represent Autocar Professional, and it's my pleasure and privilege to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Rajan Vadhera, who is President of Society of Indian Automobile Manufacturers. We have with us Mr. Rajendra Petkar, President and CTO of Tata Motors. We have with us Mr. Deepak Jain, President of ACMA, that is Auto Component Manufacturers Association of India. And we have Mr. Ashish Kare, President of FADA, the apex auto retail industry body in India. So that's a lineup of speakers. Couldn't have been better to get as many perspectives as possible. In fact, all the perspectives from the key stakeholders from the Indian automotive industry. So once again, a sincere thanks, gentlemen, and our gratitude for sparing the time to be with us in this very special edition of the Autocar Professional webinar. We look forward to a very fruitful and engaging 1 hour of discussion and deliberations, and create value out of it for everyone in a very collaborative nature, and which is in line with where the industry trend. It's getting increasingly collaborative. So on that note, I would like to hand over the webinar to Mr. Rajan Vadhera, President of SIAM, for his opening remarks. Over to you, Mr. Vadhera.
Yeah, thanks, Parua. We all know that the whole global economic activity has come to a near standstill, and the lockdown, the social distancing that has been imposed across, I believe, more than 200 countries now, and is creating havoc both on the health and safety of people as well as on the economy. Particularly for India, 2019, the economy has had a degrowth of, it was continuing, and now I believe the figures are going to be very, very bad. So we are in a state of lockdown, of a 21-day lockdown, and all indicators are that it may not be lifted. So the need of the hour is to do whatever is necessary in terms of obviously to take care of the health, safety of all the people, make sure that this pandemic is not spread. And I think at the moment the economic difficulties is not the immediate requirement, but the immediate requirement is health and safety. So to that extent, I think every citizen of the country, the entire government machinery, and everyone else is working to make sure that we don't spread this infection. And briefly, to give kind of, I think, confidence, there has been, I would say, a comprehensive package. The government announced, RBI announced, there have been measures where we're talking of, repo rates coming down, which are in fact lower than what the repo rates were there in 2009. Government is talking of infusing liquidity and putting moratorium and going for low cost working capital loans. I think all these things in a way are reassuring, but I'm very sure we will need much more than what we have. I think right now the balance in the country is obviously and should be tilted towards saving lives. The but that is paramount. We are not questioning that, and but it is also good to understand the perspective of what kind of economic loss the auto industry is going through. Just to give you an idea, the industry, as per the calculation that were done in SIAM Secretariat last week, were above the order of 2,300 crores is the loss of revenue for every day of closure. And this is on the back of a very bad last year, where overall there was a degrowth of about 20-21%. Although the numbers are not finally out, but the very first cut figures that came indicated that kind of a degrowth. Now we clearly see that April, there is very little chance that the lockdown will be lifted for manufacturing industry. As a consequence, the scenario planning that has been done by the SIAM Secretariat, if there is a GDP for the year stays at about, let's say, 3%, if we are able to maintain that, then the industry will have a range degrowth of 15 to 25% for various segments. Some segments would be 15, others will be 20, some will be 25. I think the maximum degrowth is being forecast for PV segment and the CV segment, and lesser for three-wheelers and other small commercial vehicles. Now, if the lockdown extends and may also there is very little or insignificant production and sales, in which case there is a scenario that the GDP growth is extremely muted and is only of the order of 1%, in which case I think the degrowth of the auto industry will be very high, maybe in the range of 25 to 35%. And we should all understand that there is a 20% degrowth of the last year gone. And if you forecast another 30% degrowth on that, so we are talking of almost 50% of, in a way, degrowth in 2 years, which will break the back of the auto industry. So the challenges for auto industry as a consequence of this lockdown and overall GDP degrowth are colossal, and those challenges are calling for some direct action on the demand side. They will call for some actions on the supply side. I think the supply challenges are, to my mind, few, and it will be a matter of 15 days for someone, 1 month for someone, depending on how integrated the supply chains are for that company, whether they are all integrated within India or the supply chains are integrated with parts coming from Italy, Spain, other parts of Europe, and China. To that extent, the complexities of supply chain are different depending on where are the companies sourcing those parts. And let me just put a perspective here that before BS6, when we were in the BS4 regime, almost every part was and could be sourced from India. When we have moved from BS4 to BS6 technologies, a lot of parts for meeting the emission norms had to be very quickly sourced either from or they were sourced from China. And there were the reasons for that was we did not get enough time to allow collaborations to happen between Indian ECMA companies and those companies outside so that those parts could be produced in India. Of course, some did happen. And the second reason is the scale, the quantity required, and the investments needed to manufacture those parts were not tenable, and hence they had to be imported from those countries like China and other because they had the scale. So I think it's a very important perspective to understand how supply chain will come under challenge of 15 days for somebody and a month and a half for some other OEMs. I think I would stop here, and I'm in the. I think as we discussed, the demand side challenges. Right now, the shutters are down; it is lockdown. I think once we open out, while we'll be quickly able to overcome supply challenges, the thing ahead of us is how do we meet the demand challenges, particularly when customers are going to be, confused. They are going to be concerned and consumer sentiments are not going to be good. What happens at that point in time to demand? And I think as we go, I would like to hear maybe and discuss. So with that, I would stop here and would like to, get the debate going around what are the challenges that we are likely to face. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vadaria. It's very pertinent points that were brought up, and especially the perspective that you gave about the industry pre-BS6 and pre-BS6 and during BS6. But that which also kind of enhanced the industry's domestic industry's dependence on overseas markets, auto hubs to kind of source very critical parts to meet the new norms. Well, I think there are lessons to be learned there, which we will discuss in the post the presentations, talks and presentations, and the next speaker is again someone who is a veteran in the industry and also a representative of the OEM industry, and he will bring in the perspective of engineering during such current times. I'm talking about Mr. Rajendra Petkar, who is the president and CTO of Tata Motors, and he will talk about engineering during current times, such times, because as much as while the production of cars and the production of components or the sales of those have no choice but to stop in a lockdown period, developmental work has to be carried on to the extent possible because it also affects the product pipeline of the industry. So I will just hand over the webinar to Mr. Rajendra Petkar, and I would request Mr. Petkar to kindly share his presentation. Mr. Petkar, can you hear me?
So thank you, Samudra, and good afternoon to the viewers and my fellow panel members. Mr. Rajan Madera spoke about the business impact due to the COVID-19 and what is being done by the government and the members of the society and the likely scenario that would emerge post the lockdown period. Now let me take the step as far as the engineering is concerned. and how the engineering and the R&D related situation and the community at large belonging to the engineering side, they are dealing with the pandemic situation. Let me say at the outset that for R&D engineers in the automotive sector, it has been a non-stop saga of challenges or disruptions or the shock, if I may say so, in the last 3 to 4 years. And to an auto industry, to a large extent, if I look at the last few quarters, there have been the persistent difficult times. As we all know that in India, we have one of the most dynamic regulatory regimes. We are currently facing a challenge of a transition to the BS6. There has been a liquidity crunch. The demand has been subdued, which was spoken by Rajan Vaderaji. Then there is a mobility disruption which has been happening. There is a shift which is happening toward the shared mobility as well as toward the electrification. The acquisition cost is going to go up. And during this period of time, also the government is pursuing the multiple options. So given this as a kind of a situation which has been there for the last few quarters in the Indian automotive sector, and now when you actually see it in the light of what is happening because of the global pandemic situation, the country has been in the lockdown period, and today as we speak, it is the 17th day of a lockdown. And this combination of difficult times in the past and the current situation of the pandemic, actually it makes the overall, I would say, the current situation quite challenging as far as the industry is concerned. And it is happening at a time when there has been the year end. That means you are busy with the book closure. It is a time when the BS6 transition seamlessly had to happen, almost like an overnight transition. And therefore, I am tempted to say that the industry actually is going in an uncharted territory. And I mean, the guesstimate that we heard was something like, if already we have degrown in the last year by 20%, there is a likelihood of another degrowth that we are going to expect in the current FY 2021 to the extent of 25%. So that is the overall situation that currently that we are facing. Now let me go to my second slide, which is basically related to the engineering. I think it is important to understand that as far as the engineering is concerned, it's not immune to the current situation. In fact, it is one of the most affected, I would say, the part of any automotive industry organization. And there are actually many things to deal with when we look at the engineering. Few of the things which came top of my mind is something which I have listed here. That there are a lot of roles as far as the engineering is concerned, right from the basic design, testing, development, validation, support functions, and all of them, they need to really look at what they can do best in the current situation. There has been no experience and the policies by the individual organization to an extent of talking about a meaningful work from home so far. I think, frankly speaking, all of us have been discovering the work from home culture in the last few days, and then quite a lot of learning even during this work from home kind of a situation. Then a lot of pending activities, as what I had mentioned before, that because of the March end, the year-end closure, so the stock closure, the activities related to the book closure, finance-related activities, then we had to deal with the incoming materials and the vehicles which are currently running on the road. So those are the activities, how to actually take care of them. I think that would be a challenge for every OEM who is dealing with this pandemic situation. The safety across all the value chain, plant in the engineering and across all the locations, whether it's in the dealerships, whether it's in the your warehouses. I think across the board, the safety became like a topmost agenda point when we had to, virtually overnight go for the closure. And then I think the dealing with the workforce, I think this is quite critically important because when everybody is going from home, how do we ensure that there is a continuous engagement of the people, and it's not to be seen as when you are actually working from home, it's actually no communication, and it's like total closure. I mean, the industry cannot be assuming, or any member of the industry cannot be assuming that it is like no work kind of situation. And therefore, the communication is something which has become quite important now in the times of the work from home. Now, if I dissect it further, as far as the R&D area is concerned, it can be safely divided into three parts. The one which is basically a design activity, which means the engineers from the R&D basically actually do the workstations, the CAD CAM tools, and therefore they are actually glued to the computer and create their own designs. Then there is something called as the testing and the development, which is basically all the shop related activities where the people use the equipment and the facilities to daily work and therefore generate the output. And there is always interplay between the design and the testing. And the third one is related to all the support functions which are there in any R&D organization, where to a large extent one can think of operating out of home. So I think for the engineering community, these are the three broad categories, and therefore you can't give the same treatment for all the three categories. So when it comes to the design, of course, the design activity need to continue, but how do you do it from home? The testing and the development related activity, they are basically physical in nature, and therefore that's the category which gets worst affected when they have to do the work from home. And therefore what activity that they can still do is something, as we went into the lockdown period, we had to debate on that. And as an industry, I'm sure now that each one, we have the plan how to have the meaningful engagement of the people who are basically shop oriented. So with that, let me just go to my next slide, that the structured approach is what is something going to be of immense value here when we look at engineering to be effective even during the pandemic time. And let me divide the whole set of activities to be done into the four buckets. The first one, which is related to preparation and the execution. To my mind, this is all done and dusted, because this was relevant when there was the clue that there is likelihood of a lockdown either in the state or in the country. And therefore how one gets prepared for a lockdown, and therefore constant engagement with the team members, define the CFT and take the call related to which functions should shut down first and which should shut down later on. But this first part is now done and dusted, it is behind us. Now currently we are in the second bucket, that is in the shutdown phase, where all the people are now currently at home at each OEM location, and therefore there are a set of things which are currently being done, and I'll go into a little bit of a detail of the shutdown phase in my next slide. Then there is something now, this restart phase, and whenever the lockdown gets lifted, I am pretty sure that not on the first day everybody is going to come to the work. And therefore what is going to be the calibrated approach for getting the workforce to come inside the premises, and how do we minimize the risk, still keeping in mind the requirement of a social distancing, and then go to the full ramp up phase and stabilize the operations within the engineering as was the case before. So these are the four set of activities in four different time zones, and currently we are in the shutdown phase. So I think in the shutdown phase, how one can still do the engineering, which is the crux of my presentation. I believe that all of us can still look at what can be done, and I must admit that there has been a great learning even for the people in the engineering, that day by day they are discovering there is more and more that can be done. And thanks to the use of all the digital tools, all the connectivity which is there through the broadband, I think we are able to harness the potential of a technology and do a lot of work. So some of the examples which I thought could be relevant to the viewers would be like this. Lot of activities around the project review that can be done. Decisions can be taken through the governance forums. Engineering sign-off related activities, which means if the project has come nearing to a completion, and then if some maker-checker concept is to be applied, and one has to go through all the activities which have been done as a part of a development, then that kind of a scrutiny of the project that can be done remotely. You don't have to be there in the factory for doing that. Then what are going to be the next set of the critical activities? I think one can utilize the time, and this I do believe it's a little peaceful time that one can actually get into a little bit of defining what's going to be the next horizon. Then the focus on the future technology and the product roadmap. I think in our day-to-day working, I'm pretty sure the engineers don't find time, but this is the time which can be utilized to actually look at what is there in store as far as the technology evolution is concerned. And we have seen that either the universities, institutes, or our own fellow industry functionaries, they are offering a lot of online courses. So that actually becomes very handy for those who would like to pursue on the path of getting themselves fully educated on the new areas. The activities related to warranty analytics, DFMEA, those can be done. Drafting and filing of the intellectual property, that can be done. Ideation activities can be done. Then all the regulatory issues, discussions, related to the standard formation and all that, that can be done online. And any activity related to, for the company in the form of the appraisal, balance scorecard, all that can be done as a part of, sitting from the home. Talking specifically about the finances, they can do a lot of activities, and few of them which I have listed here is about year-end provisioning, invoice clearances, plan for because now we are into the next financial year, and not really a good time to look at, that whether we can have a lot of money to do a lot of work in the FY 2021. But what is the bare minimum that needs to be done, which can sustain the organization? And in current time, the cash is going to be king. And therefore, if you have a limited cash, the deployment of the cash. So this is a good time basically to think about and prioritize the projects which are going to be critically important for any organization. Closure of open issues, with the statutory auditors, book closures and all that, planning of the capacity capability. These are the things which can be done. And in the area of the competence and the capability development, because this is, as I said before, is a good time for people to do the self-reflection and come up with what they think that they can do in the area of a new to broaden their horizon. So I have just listed what is top of my mind, and where at least we have found them to be worthy of carrying out these activities during this work from home period. And I'm pretty sure that there can be many more which could be added to this list. However, this all will not be possible until there are some basic key enablers are in the place. And the first and the foremost is about the digital tools to collect and monitor the workforce health and on the daily basis, because if one is healthy, safe, only then you can talk about carrying out the activities from the home. So that's the priority number one. And then you have all this seamless IT support to access for the company's systems and the environment through the VPN login process, which allows the seamless communication, from one location to the other location. And with a lot of the backend support which can be provided by the design and the computing systems. Then disciplined use of online meeting and the data sharing tools, like you can have the MS Teams, we can have Skype, Zoom meetings and all that, which can be utilized to the best possible extent. And this is one of the most important enablers in the terms of continuing the engineering activities even during the pandemic times. Then the information sessions and the calls to address the employees' questions, because it's not enough that you communicate only with your next line of command, but it is very important that you actually deal with your entire teams, and the teams will be very large. And therefore, the modern systems actually allow you to address your entire workforce and stay connected with the people. That could be a good enabler to ensure that the engineering really becomes successful in this lockdown period. Then seamless support from common and emergency services like transportation, occupational health, medical team, security, administration. That is something that can be solicited on call. And you have the committed and the aligned teams to match the time differences across locations. Many of us, we work with our global peers in the different parts of the world. And therefore, it's quite feasible to ensure that all the people, they get connected. And especially when you are working during the weekdays, of course, there is no excuse to say that that you are busy, you're going somewhere, or you're traveling and all that. So I found that to be quite easygoing as far as the current period is concerned. Then the regular communication and updates to all the employees, leveraging the various handles which are available. I think the sky is the limit from my point of view, and sharing of the online learning platforms and the tools. So this is what I think that these are the very key enablers for the engineering community to be successful during this lockdown period. So just let me now take to the last slide. In summary, what I am saying is that the auto OEMs in India have actually swiftly responded to the shutdown call. In fact, it was almost like instant call that there was no time. I think there was no time even more than the 24 hours to get into the lockdown mode, but that is something which is behind us. I think now we should focus on what best can be done during the current work from home period of time, and lot of things can be done. I fully endorse the view that the engineering activities should not be compromised, and therefore, what all and in what smart manner the engineering can still continue is something which is the thing to be understood and to be done by the engineering community. Prepare for the change world, because now I think the discovery during the phase is that the things start to become efficient. I mean, those where we thought always it's not possible, that there are a lot of limitations of the work from home, but I think there are a lot of tacit benefits which have been seen now, and we have a well-informed and the digitally connected engineering fraternity, and actually that is going to now pave the way for the future. Collaboration is going to be absolutely key, and I think today, as we are individually at our home, but I think collaboration is not stopping, and in fact the collaboration is increasing across the locations and across the institutes. And I think I would say the personal experience, the work from home is the best opportunity to learn and upgrade oneself, and it's a good opportunity also for the cost avoidance and the cash conservation and the control on the discretionary spends, which is currently the crying need of our as far as the industry is concerned. So this is what I would like to say, and I would just stop my few thoughts at this point of time, and I would like to now hand over to Sumantra back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Petkar. Indeed, very interesting points, and really kind of, I think I will bring that up during the discussion. I'm sure you must be kind of leveraging lot many new tools to kind of coordinate, not among engineering teams, production teams, among plants, not only in India but overseas also. Very critical is the connection with your with METC, which is the Tata Motors European Tech Center, because that's also playing a very key role in all your new product development program. We'll discuss about that, and also thanks for sharing the learnings that you have come across, discovered during this period. I'm sure this will be very beneficial to all the participants in this special webinar, which includes, as of now, we have about 412 attendees who are joining from various parts of the India and perhaps from outside India as well. So thank you very much once again, Mr. Petkar, for sharing a very enriching and very interesting presentation. Now, what you have shared is applicable both on the OE side as well as the component side, which is what makes it even more valuable. So talking about the component industry, now let me introduce our next speaker, Mr. Deepak Jain, who is the president of ACMA, which is Auto Components Manufacturers Association of India, the apex body for the component manufacturers present in India. So Deepak, over to you for your talk, please.
Thank you, Sumantran. I will pick up the thread and some keywords which our esteemed customers, both Mr. Vadera as well as Mr. Petkar, had said. I think Mr. Vadera talked about the complexity of the supply chain, looking into the scenario of a negative growth year for the industry. And Mr. Petkar did mention that cash is going to be the key for survival. I want to add that if I look at from the automotive component supply chain aspect, we got disrupted starting in the month of January itself. And of course, we had been facing unprecedented 20-month slowdown, as well as the component industry had also aligned with our OEMs, parallelly invested for the BS6 transition opportunity. What it means is that we had also probably taken debt. We had also probably looked at forward plans going forward to localize these technologies, because given the time we had, you, Sumantran, mentioned about the world record which Indian auto sector had made for BS6 transitioning. Given the time, a lot of the critical parts were being imported, but the Indian component industry was looking at a Make in India initiative. Now, in terms of just economic impact, we closed on 31st March a financial year, and a rough calculation states that the component sector, which last year was about $57 billion, which probably this year would be closing aligned with what our OEMs have come in terms of about 15% maybe negative growth. Just 1 week impact of closure in the month of March, which is 8 days, has basically given us a 3% negative on the total annual outlook. And of course, we get into the new financial year with already a 2-week shutdown. Hence, it's extremely critical that it's not about no more about earnings, our revenues have dried up. It is all right now, how do we survive this period of doing a cash conservation? And we also understand that whenever we are allowed to restart, this COVID-19 is not going away anytime soon. We will have to adjust our shop floors, our people to the new normal, which means that we will have to take various protocols and actions on our shop floor, and it will be a staggered approach towards basically not opening up, but also resuming our ramp up situation. I think fundamentally today, our concern, and I must also take this opportunity to thank our OEMs who have supported us by timely making payments, because this is critical, where on one hand, the government has mandated us to pay the workforce and the workmen. And unfortunately, till now, we have not really actually seen for the industry, for the sector, economic bailout package. As the auto supply chain is there, it is extremely complex, because not just there is geographical linkages, but also in terms of scale, we are quite tiered out as tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. And hence, if we were not able to get cash from our customers, or if we were not even actually getting the statutory dues which we had requested for deferment by the government, we probably would not have been able to do our responsibility of actually paying our employees for March and also paying our tier 2s and tier 3s. I think currently the challenge now is how are the supply chains preparing the shop floor for an opening? And the opening would be ramping up with very lean resources. We will have to conserve cash, and probably all the investments would probably have to be deferred. However, there are certain export markets which we need to actually cater to, else there will be a loss of opportunity for us in terms of getting in. We know that the essential services are already been on, but essential services to be on needs logistic movement. And now with the closure of all the parts and plants, I think it is also very, very difficult for us to actually even cater to the sales and services requirements of these essential goods. One thing, of course, it has taught us is this whole concept of the remote working for the manufacturing sector, which I believe that we have to take trust in our employees to actually ensure that they are working, getting the job done. And many of us are talking about various means of collaboration using digital tools, as well as using the complete alignment of knowledge and lessons learned. For example, the global lessons learned in China, how they are maintaining their shop floor. We are very quickly adapting those to our shop floors as well. I'm very happy to note that as ACMA, we're actually trying to prepare a protocol which will be rolling over to all our membership, which means where it can talk about the guidance of safe and secure shop floors for the workforce. Now, I think the key aspect today is to give confidence to our workforce to actually come back on jobs. And I think there is a lot of, as the sector, especially the component, do actually also employ a lot of the contractual workforce. And I think the concern is not just migration, but also the concern is how do we ensure their safekeeping and not too much movement, which is going to happen when they return back to the work. So I think these new normals and these new trends in supply chain will have to actually take care. I think one point which has been there is when we also restart, I think because of the BS6, a lot of the components are being imported from the European markets. Also in January, because of China being locked down, a lot actually got disrupted way earlier in basically the supply chain. And hence, how do we balance this both going forward to ensure that supply chains doesn't get disrupted? There is a seamlessness, because we are so integrated that it does not help that if one state is actually opened up and one state doesn't, and because our supply chains get linked out as well on those aspects. So I think these are the challenges which will be there for basically the whole supply chain going forward. And I'm just hoping that we are also able to get certain guidelines, not by just opening up, but also some economic relief by the government, so that we are able to discharge our responsibilities towards our employees, towards tier 2, tier 3, and also most importantly to the customer. I think fundamentally we'll also have to look at renewing the demand, getting the demand back on track, because in that scenarios we've also made recommendation together as SIAM and ACMA to ensure that we get certain GST reductions to ensure that demand is boosted in the midterm to long term, so that the economy can be recovered back. So I just will close with these comments on the supply chain challenges, and I'll give it back to you, Sumatra. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deepak. Indeed, a very relevant points that you touched upon, and talking about lockdown and the supply chain impact. It reminds me of a recent chat which I had with a board member of a company who has a plant very in the border of Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, and he was saying that when this lockdown started getting implemented, he had a truckload of components which you could see from the plant, which is again, as I mentioned, at the border, but that truck couldn't come near the plant because it falls in a different state, and that, as a result of which, his whole production schedule got disrupted. Indeed, lot many things that needs to be discussed and taken care of as we move towards the end of this 21-day lockdown period, which, as we hear, could be extended. Will it be partially? Will it be fully? We have no clarity yet. We are expecting some announcement tomorrow, but we will definitely discuss the implications of what happens if it's a partial lockdown, what happens if the lockdown persists, continues. So on that note, once again, Deepak, thank you very much. Now I would, moving from automobiles to components, we move to the auto retail business, because that is where we have that's a key part of the whole chain of the automotive industry. And now it gives me pleasure to introduce Mr. Ashish Kare, who is the president of FADA, the apex body of automotive dealers in India. So Ashish, over to you for your opening remarks, please.
Yeah, thanks, Sumantra. Indeed, this is a unprecedented situation, a total shock, especially coming after 18 months of slowdown that the auto industry has been facing. I think it was already commented by Deepak before. It's now a question of survival for the dealer community. Also, we are already operating on very thin margin and high cost structures. So definitely it's a question of survival whenever the lockdown opens. As of now, the dealer community is completely following the lockdown protocol. We are awaiting the next instructions from the government. As and when the lockdown opens up, luckily for us, we would be able to scale up operations pretty soon, because almost entire manpower teams that we have are local and they are based locally. FADA will be working on three fronts to ensure that dealers are able to survive during this difficult time. Within the industry and outside the industry. Definitely, first and foremost, we look for the government, look to the government for immediate support to tide over this lockdown period. As has been mentioned, March salaries have been done because the lockdown was not for the entire month, but April, especially for the dealer community, is going to be pretty tough to ensure salaries. At the same time, we would like to retain the entire workforce that we have because ultimately our main wealth is our people. So we would look to the government for support during this lockdown period. A few suggestions which we are putting forward to our government during this time is, look at salaries under ESI. As this is a pandemic, it has been declared a pandemic, and ESI is there for such situations. If the government is able to look for salary reimbursement through ESI, that would reduce the pressure onto dealers. The government has already announced PF contribution for MSMEs up to 100 employees, but the dealership structures are such that we cannot operate within that 100 limit, and most of our dealerships stand outside that limit. So we would be requesting for a higher limit for that, and waiver of the 90% clause for auto dealerships, specifically looking at the structures of our businesses. Of course, we have been advocating to the government that our service setups get covered under all the qualification that is required for MSME, but we are still not covered under MSME. So that is another demand which we would be taking up, so that the benefits that are extended to MSME get covered to auto dealership also. With regards to working capital, we will require the cash flow currently is zero for auto dealerships, but as I said, majority of our costs are fixed costs, whether it is salaries, whether it is the interest, and whether it is rentals that we pay. So these costs have to be covered, and today the inflow is zero, earnings are zero. So we are definitely going to appeal to the government to reset the clock for the lockdown period so that the cost of interest is not burdened. Right now, we have got a moratorium, but it's a moratorium. We have to repay that within 3 months once things come to normal, which we are hoping. But even that will be a burden for the dealerships. So that is something which we are definitely going to appeal, amongst other things, for looking at immediate support so that the dealerships stay afloat. But the most important thing, I think, for us and the entire auto industry is going to be demand once the lockdown opens up. I think the projections that Sam has made are very scary. Definitely coming after a double-digit growth in the past 15 to 18 months, and then looking at this kind of a growth. As I've already mentioned, that auto dealerships are anyway operating on a thin margin with very, very low sustenance levels. I think if this is the kind of degrowth that we are looking at, or even is being projected, it's a very scary situation for the dealership community. So I think all of us, SIAM has anyway taken the lead, ACMA is also doing it. We are also in our own way advocating to the government that once the lockdown opens up, demand is something which will have to be supported. This is an unprecedented situation, and the government will have to take unprecedented measures. I think GST cut has already been mentioned, and it is something which we have been advocating. It will basically get the cost down for a new customer, even if it is temporary. I think today is the right time if the government has to act upon it. There are some ongoing advocacies that we have been doing to battle the slowdown, scrappage, attractive incentive-based scrappage policy was one. But I think over and above that, they have to look at auto as a, uh, an industry which is also a sentiment booster. I think auto sales, first and foremost, have multiplier effects. It is not just one vehicle being sold. It is an entire ecosystem. You have insurance, you have finance, you have manpower associated with it, dealerships, component manufacturers, auto manufacturers, and support staff which go in that. So I think if auto is focused upon as one of the key enablers to come back to normalcy, it will definitely help boost the confidence overall, which is going to be low post the lockdown for everyone. And I think, as one of the panelists mentioned, that corona, even if the lockdown opens, it is not going anywhere till the vaccine is developed. So there is a sword hanging on our heads, and therefore confidence will be low, even if the lockdown is opened up, whenever it is opened up. So I think we are looking for some unprecedented measures to support demand. And we will have to look at something which probably the US did in 2008, 2009, where a cash for clinker program was there. So sort of a direct benefit for consumers for a limited period to go out and buy vehicles, because this is, as I said, confidence would be low. There is no doubt, and probably the consumers would focus more on essentials rather than discretionary purchase today. So he has to have an incentive. So I think that is something which we will have to see. Depreciation is another incentive which was offered last year during the slowdown period. I think we are definitely going to recommend that it be extended for this financial year. And in fact, we are going to recommend to include individual buyers also in this, so that it is extended as an incentive in his own income tax return, and he's able to get benefit. So that is a way of passing on incentive. The financial markets, the banks and NBFCs are going to have their own set of problems, and with trying to increase demand, their support is extremely important. They need to go out and aggressively do auto loans the way they have been doing earlier. They need to support the dealer community in their working capital needs with special conditions. These are not normal times. So we are also recommending to the government to treat auto retail loans and auto dealership working capital needs as a priority sector for a period of 1 year. I think if this is done, probably that is the time that it is going to take us for to come back to normalcy. And if this is given a priority sector rating this time, I think the banks would focus on ensuring that this much resources are allocated for this sector. As I said, most of our the biggest problem for us is going to be demand. With regards to within the industry, I think us and SIAM have to work together to ensure that dealership costs come down. We are already working on ensuring liquidity. SIAM and most of the OEMs have been very prompt in releasing all our receivables. That has helped us to ensure that all our expenses, especially salary for March, has been paid through. And now, for, as I said, that looking at the low sustenance level of dealers, we are working with all our OEMs for structural support, so that April salaries and are also done in a normal fashion, and we are able to retain the workforce. This workforce and the entire dealer network is going to be a very important, a critical element for the auto industry to come back to normalcy, or at least try and arrest whatever degrowth comes out of the coronavirus situation. Some of the OEMs have already come forward. They've announced some good structural support for dealerships, and most of the others are working towards it. I'm sure as one family, there will be support coming forward. I think going forward for the dealership community, what is going to be extremely important is to ensure that we get into frugal cost structures. This is where we will have to work with our OEMs to ensure that our costs are reduced. As I said, if we go by the projections of degrowth that are coming forward, even if we take the least pessimistic scenario, it's not a very good scenario compared to the past 18 months of degrowth that we've had. So we will have to work towards lowering our cost structures. And one thing which we will need to now discuss with our OEMs through SIAM is definitely look at the overall dealership model, because for the past 3 to 4 years, this dealership model has been sort of structured for a growth market. Last 15-18 months have taught us a lot, and I think this year itself is going to be a very tough challenge. As I said, it's a question of survival. There would be many dealers who would probably be on the verge of shutting down if this kind of cost structures continue and this kind of degrowth goes. So we are definitely going to advocate and work with SIAM and through them with all the OEMs to ensure that a proper margin structure or a proper operating margin structure is worked out, which is definitely something which will help us build higher sustenance and will be at par with international standards. So I think a lot of battle on many fronts, but I'm sure if all of us are together and with the government support, we would be able to at least arrest whatever best we can in terms of the damage that it does to us. Thanks, Sumatra. This is it from my side.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ashish. And indeed, I think if we are talking about the automotive retail industry, I think we are talking about no less than 15,000 dealers with about 26,500 outlets, if I'm not wrong.
Yes, and we employ a workforce of directly and indirectly about 40 lakh people in these outlets, Sumantra.
That's a huge figure, and as you have mentioned, the pressure that unprecedented the unprecedented challenge at this, especially in the midst of this pandemic. Indeed, I think there are a lot of levers will have to be pulled to kind of give the necessary and deserving support. So on that note, thank you very much, Ashish, for sharing your thoughts. So we have got perspectives, all possible perspectives from the automotive industry. And thank you, gentlemen, for sharing your initial remarks and your presentations. And I would like to start this discussion segment with a clarification from Mr. Vadera. Mr. Vadera mentioned the initial calculation for the month of industry performance for the month of March is about 23% degrowth. Is that correct?
Yeah, around that much, 20-odd% degrowth in total.
Okay. Within that, you mentioned that in the current phase, the PV segment perhaps would be the most, will see the biggest knock. How much of a degrowth there?
I don't exactly, remember that figure, but it would be quite substantial. I think about 18 to 20% is the degrowth there. Are you talking of FY20 or FY21 estimates? What are you talking of?
Now, I'm talking about FY20.
FY20, the PV degrowth figure?
Yes.
I don't exactly remember. Let me just quickly see my laptop. Give me a minute.
That's okay. That's okay. While you check that, Deepak, in terms of the component industry's readiness for BS6, I can understand that the very little time of about 3.5 years or so to bypass one emission regime and leapfrog to BS6, it was realistically impossible in a way. But now, how do you see the road ahead for the supply chain for BS6 in terms of the localization drive? Post,
Well, first and foremost,
talking about post the lockdown, of course.
Yeah, so I think in the short term, I may say, because there has been a lot of import, because we did not get the appropriate time for testing validations on the local components. So I think a lot has to be done import, and a lot of them would be probably from European, counterparts. Now, most of these European counterparts also have manufacturing facilities within India, which actually they would be doing a midterm localization plan for that. So I think short term, because of BS6 transition, India may get disrupted more because now Europe markets are completely closed, right? China's just started to see opening up. But I think going forward, I think it will be extremely, challenging time, because on one hand, the component guys are actually just managing the cash flows to survive this negative growth, this COVID-19. On the second hand, there will be pressures to further invest on localization content, as well as what Mr. Pedkar said on the engineering content. So I think it will be a very, very challenging time. And of course, now this year, all our profitability also will be stretched. You have to understand we are in SMEs, small and medium enterprises, and quite integrated in terms of with each other. So I think this is going to be critical. And only for BS6, I think we will have no chance but to invest. But we'll have to also probably get certain support from our OEMs on this.
Okay, Sumantra, I have the figures for you. PVD growth was 18%.
Yes, sir.
And Sumantra, I would just like to interject what you asked that question to Deepak on the supply chain changes for BS6. I think as a nation, we must learn our lessons, because what is experience is what you learn from your, I should say, mistakes. Okay. While I think it is important to push for regulations in our country, which is related to health, safety of occupants, safety of people on the road, and make the cars and vehicles more safe, driving practices safe, emission requirements, all this is very important. I think also is important is to see that we do our development in phases in such a manner that we are able to produce all the parts for that technology within the country. And let me share a perspective with you. Most advanced nations have a 10-year roadmap of regulations, and that map is prepared along with the various connected ecosystem and stakeholders, largely auto OEMs and the component developers. This large roadmap that is prepared over a period of time is then heavily balanced for development within the country. In our case, we badly need Make in India for the prosperity of the country. And so therefore, I would say lessons learned is that any regulations that come should fundamentally address, can we produce parts for that regulation in India? Yes or no? If yes, well and good, what is the development time? If no, then what is needed so that the component manufacturers can tie up and everything is done in India? I think these are the lessons for the future. While it is good to have global supply chains, one very big lesson is one should have sustainable supply chains within the country. And if I have learned any lesson, if I was to advise policy makers, regulators, this would be my recommendation.
Correct. In fact, that was a question I had in mind. Now, this question is both for Mr. Vadera and Deepak. This, as much as it is it is a challenging, a very unfortunate scenario that we are in. Is it also a kind of a strong call to really enhance efforts in all fronts to be more self-sufficient as an industry, the Indian automotive industry? I can understand you cannot insulate yourself from the global world in terms of supply chain, but perhaps bring it down to a very minimal level and be much more self-sufficient than what we have been so far. If yes, how could we achieve that status?
So Subhadra, let me take that. I hope Deepak, you don't mind. I'll take that answer. It's easier said than done. Now, having Deepak knows very well what is the cost of shifting to a new vendor. These are huge costs, and parts are to be a part of the systems, and then systems have to be tested independently. Systems have to be tested along with the vehicle. So if you are saying that we'll be able to set up new supply chains, it's clearly not affordable from a time perspective, from the cost perspective, and the scale of volumes that we have in our country. So therefore, It's not easily possible for all the segments. And I think one other thing which is very important for all of us to understand is that automotive industry is not only cars. Okay, automotive industry is cars and commercial vehicles, two-wheelers, three-wheelers, small four-wheelers. So everything has to be seen differently. Today, two-wheelers is a mass rapid transport that we use. It has to be affordable. And so to that extent, you cannot keep adding to the cost. As it is, auto industry, you know the figures that we have put across, spent close to 60,000 crores doing BS6, and we will have to recover this money with the good growth figures. And with the degrowth that we are talking of, how will we ever recover the costs of BS6 with this kind of a scenario? So I'm just telling you a perspective. It's not at all easy with high technology parts, particularly BS6 parts, to shift to another supply chain. It's not affordable and not easy.
I can understand, but Deepak, I'm saying in terms of transition towards that B2B more self-sufficient, does it give you, I can understand the cash constraints and the pressure that maybe in the immediate possible future, maybe with some policy support, become a hub, not only for the domestic market, but also exports.
So let me first compliment Mr. Vadera, because the point is that supply chain works for our customers, other OEMs. And I think what Mr. Vadera has very beautifully articulated is this whole not just complexity, but also interdependence of basically the supply chain and the OEMs. Specifically coming out, we have to also understand that we're extremely price sensitive market. Please understand the demand got muted before even COVID, because of the regulations coming in and the price escalation started, and everyone was
and they came into quick succession.
Prior to COVID-19, even the auto industry was saying that our recoveries are going to happen in H2, not in basically H1. And now this probably will be further delayed recovery. I think the effort of the supply chain will be to continuously work with our customer to ensure that we keep doing the right localization, which means we have to do the right localization in terms of Q, C, D, and keep on pushing the efforts towards the same. Right. But I think it will be constrained, because I think the supply chain today would actually be also looking at our own internal survival and using our cash flows with this muted growth or the degrowth to just basically cater to the current operations.
I can understand. Ashish, I have one question that comes to my mind. You talked about maybe the industry as a whole needs, I mean the OE and the retail industry collectively need to relook at the business model, the auto dealership model, and the structure of it. There have been this has come up on multiple occasions, this question, even in the slowdown when we saw some of the very well established dealerships being forced to close down. So what are the alternatives? What are the options that you think could be explored by the industry?
I think, Sumatra, as I mentioned, that the entire dealership model, the past before this slowdown actually hit all of us, was completely structured for a continuous growth market year over year. I think the slowdown opened up all our eyes, whether it is our manufacturers and us as dealers, and that is when corrective measures have been started to be taken in. I mentioned two key points. I think these are the two key points we will have to work on along with our principal companies. One is to get down the cost structures, and definitely, as I said, to increase the earning levels or our operating margins. Especially looking at not just today's disruption that is currently going on, but the disruption that hit us even before COVID of slowdown. And I think in a global world scenario where everything is interconnected, disruptions are going to be order of the day. So the dealership community sustenance has to be built up much more than what it is currently today. Some work definitely on our part also has to be done. We have to ensure that our working is frugal. We have to ensure that we are not financially over dependent just on borrowed money. We have to do on our part a few corrections which are required, especially in these difficult times. But I think we will have to work with our principals to look at a business model which is far more sustenance. In a 21-day lockout today, you have dealerships, which could probably stare at their own survival if no support comes in either from the manufacturers or either from the government. So I think looking at that, we have to now restructure the business model, and two things which I suggested, getting down operating costs and increasing the operating margin, getting them to international standards, and ensuring that a higher sustenance is built up so that we can face these disruptions, which probably would continue to come.
I think, Sumatra, I would like to interject here, if that's okay with you. I think Ashish, what he's saying is very, very true. But I would like to state that a much higher order transformation is likely to happen across value chain. It will happen in OEMs, it will happen manufacturers, it will happen with the selling process. I think the digital transformation, which hitherto, was a very big, I would say, resistance. See, we're all very resistant to change. This will all change because even I am learning new things while I'm working from home. Digitally, I'm learning many new things that I could not do. So what is happening is that the resistance from everyone, senior management, middle management, all kinds of parts of the organization, all this is going to stop, and a lot of comfort will come in doing digital transitions. So as Ashish said, most of the vehicles will be sold digitally, and across, I think, countries, across all kinds of products, all the enterprises will have to make sure that they are digitally most savvy, most well connected, and obviously it will bring the cost down, and all other challenges that we are currently facing. This is probably a very big trump that I can see. Digital outlook is the outlook for future.
Right, I understand. And we have already seen some very, very small, albeit small examples of digital leveraging of digital technology in the auto retail space. Perhaps it will catch up even more. One key theme which is also gaining pace in the industry, gain traction in the industry. Earlier, it was more of a exception, then it became a norm. Now looks like it could be a necessity, and that is about the collaboration between or among OEMs and even in the supplier space, perhaps. So my question to Mr. Petkar and Mr. Vadera, this whole trend of collaboration, has the industry come to a stage, especially in India and some other global markets which are also reeling under pressure, for collaboration to become almost a necessity for survival and perhaps growth also?
Yeah, so Sumatra,
are you asking me about it?
Both Mr. Petkar and you, I think Mr. Petkar was starting.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think Sumatra, this is actually a key point, that sitting at home using all the electronics media, I think what has come to the notice that the collaboration is going to be the key, and that's what actually is happening. And therefore, it is now the one world kind of scenario that we can see, and it allows you to have multiple interactions in the smaller clusters, bigger clusters, and I think people have realized the importance of supporting and working and collaborating with each other. I don't think that anybody can say now that within their own domain they are good and therefore they can carry on with the life as usual. I don't think so, and therefore this kind of a pandemic actually is paving the way for a significant collaboration opportunities across the value chain, and India has to collaborate with the manufacturing has to collaborate with the supply chain, the manufacturing has to collaborate with the sales and the marketing, the product development agencies have to collaborate with the end customers. So I think it's a one virtual ecosystem which is now getting shape as we are witnessing that.
Right.
I would,
Mr. Vadera, your thoughts, please.
yeah. See, I would say that see the kind of changes that are happening around in the automotive industry, whether it is the technology changes that are happening, the solution, the services that are coming in. You're talking of ride sharing. You're talking of all kinds of technology advancements in hybrid, fossil fuels, electric vehicles. All these amazing transformations cannot happen unless the entire value chain is connected and collaborates. So I think collaboration is the entire auto industry in India has grown on collaboration. I think the finest examples of collaboration of supply chain can be seen in the Indian auto industry. So I think there is no doubt that collaboration, without collaboration you cannot succeed in this. So therefore, all the trading partners which are there have to collaborate, to pull together this during this difficult time. So I believe it's a cliche.
Right.
We have to collaborate.
And Mr. Vadera, one specific question comes to my mind, especially in this pandemic times when social distancing is no more a choice option. You have to practice it. Even post COVID-19 times, do you think this having any impact on the vehicle industry, on the automobile industry, especially the passenger vehicle industry? Could it be that perhaps people may not,
I think,
let's say, shared mobility industry be kind of see some impact out of that?
I think social distancing is not going to be a choice. We have to maintain the distance. It is inevitable so that we are safe, and for a safe and sustainable work culture, social distancing will become the norm, and I think it will affect us in various ways. First, within the workplace, norms will get changed. I'm sure if we have 40-50% degrowth, you can imagine what kind of capacities we have in our plants. So I foresee, and already we are talking to government that allow us a 12-hour shift. Instead of doing two shifts and having your fixed costs spread over two shifts, it is better that you do one 12-hour shift. And also lot of models may get changed of why would if possible, even the canteen model, food model, sanitizing model, work culture model. A lot of what we are learning is that there are many jobs and roles that can be done best work from home. Secondly, what we can see is that manpower can be rotated. So to that extent, social distancing will be a norm. I think till we find a cure for this problem, social distancing will be required. And your second, your question about ride sharing, how will that impact?
Yeah.
I think definitely. All of us will be very wary of sitting in a car that has been used, since morning to pick up and drop people. We don't know who was the earlier person who sat on that seat. So to that extent, all of us, I'm talking for myself. I would definitely like to move to a private car and not take ride sharing or move in a taxi if I have a choice. And I think many of us have a choice. And for health, even if it's an expensive choice, people will like to exercise that. So I believe ride sharing may take a hit, as a consequence of the social distancing.
Yeah. Ashish, just taking a thread out of that, could also be some kind of solace, so to speak, for the retail industry, because growing number of people prefer who were otherwise using shared mobility or public transport would prefer passenger vehicles. Perhaps that would also be create a little bit of a demand nonetheless, isn't it?
Yeah, Sumantra, I think as Mr. Vadera said, there is a very good argument which stands there. People would be wary to, sit in something where they are not aware of the immediate past history of where it has gone or what kind of passengers have sat in it. I think even two-wheelers would be one area which would be a little bit impacted positively in the cities. I've got one or two friends who don't own a two-wheeler who said, yeah, I would probably buy a scooter or a motorcycle and roam alone for small tasks. So yes, but I think we will have to actually wait and watch because there's going to be there was a pre-corona world and now there's going to be a post-corona world. We really don't know after this lockdown with what kind of mindset people actually come out and what all has impacted them. So we'll have to really wait and see how it pans out. But I think there is a good argument there, definitely, with social distancing and people being careful, that ride sharing would probably take a back seat and ownership would come in the forefront. I think definitely that looks like a positive in the immediate.
Okay, thank you. Before we end, Deepak, your comments. I mean, from what I observed, even before the slowdown was setting in, and much before this whole COVID-19 phase started, we were already witnessing consolidation in the automotive or in the component industry. There was collaboration on the OEM side. There was more of a consolidation or a lot of inorganic activities in the component industry in India and globally. And we have seen there are examples of Indian component manufacturers going overseas and making inorganic moves. We see that kind of happening more, not necessarily in the immediate future, but little later as collaboration happens in the automotive industry as well as consolidation.
So definitely consolidation will happen, collaboration will happen. You have to understand that COVID-19 has not just disrupted one market, it's disrupted the whole world. And there will be a new normal going forward where with probably reduced revenues globally, we will probably have to start consolidating and collaborating. Currently, my view is very clear that today, I think everyone will have to fend to itself. It's like Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, that we'll have to have survival of the fittest today. And who will survive then, who will come out, will have to then look at the opportunities which will be probably there within the ecosystem to consolidate and even to collaborate. So I think this will be a measured view, but I think going forward, I think we will see this happening.
Okay. On that note, we come to the end of this very interesting and special webinar on rising to a challenge, business in the midst of a pandemic. So thank you very much, gentlemen. And as we move towards prepare ourselves towards a new normal, our humble request is for everyone to stay home, stay safe. And news just comes in that perhaps we will have a 2-week extension to the ongoing lockdown. So please stay safe and wishing everyone good health and prosperity once the things come back to normal and we really realign, the industry realigns and the whole society realigns to much better times, much better practices. And on that note, once again, Mr. Rajan Vadera, Mr. Deepak Jain, Mr. Rajendra Petkar, Mr. Ashish Kare, and all the attendees, sincere thanks and gratitude for your participation, and would also like to thank my colleagues and all of you who have logged in and spared your time to be in this webinar and contribute towards contribute your thoughts for the benefit of everyone. So thank you very much, gentlemen and ladies. And on that note, we come to the close of this webinar. I would like to thank our partners, Orbitsys, Trinity Simulations, and Ultra Labs for supporting this initiative by Autocar Professional. On that note, thank you very much and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us, Sumanta. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Goodbye.